On a desolate highway, a notorious fugitive gang, fleeing a violent heist, cornered what they thought was an easy target. They were about to learn their prey was Steven Seagal, and their cross-country escape had just ended. The sun bled across the Arizona sky, a merciless orb that baked the asphalt of Highway 287 into a shimmering mirage. In the vast, silent expanse of the desert, a lone gas station stood as a sun-bleached outpost, its pumps coated in a fine layer of red dust, its signage faded to a pale ghost of its former self. It was a place forgotten by time, a relic of a slower world. Into this silence rolled a modified black Ford F-150 Raptor, a beast of a machine that seemed to absorb the blistering sunlight rather than reflect it. The truck parked with a quiet finality beside a pump. Steven Seagal emerged, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of immense power held in reserve. He wore a pair of worn denim jeans and a dark brown suede jacket that had seen its share of roads, its quality apparent even under a film of dust. His long, dark hair was pulled back in its signature tight ponytail, and his face was a mask of calm neutrality. He was heading to the convenience store for a bottle of water, a simple act in a day filled with hours of silent driving. He nodded once to the elderly cashier, a man whose face was a roadmap of weary years, and stepped into the cool, still air of the shop. Outside, that stillness was about to be violated. Two cars screeched into the lot, not with the roar of bikers looking for fun, but with the frantic, aggressive sound of caged animals. A beat-up Dodge Challenger, its grille cracked, and a dusty Chevrolet Suburban, one taillight shattered, boxed in the Raptor. The vehicles looked like they'd been through a war, and the men who spilled out carried the same desperate, dangerous energy. This was the Crimson Jackals, a crew with a multi-state bulletin out for their arrest after a bank job in Utah went sideways. Their leader, a man who called himself Kane, stepped out of the Challenger. He was broad-shouldered, with cold, predatory eyes that scanned everything and everyone for threats. On the side of his neck, a tattoo of an hourglass dripping blood was a stark symbol of their desperate flight from the law. Well, Kane sneered, his voice a gravelly rasp. He gestured with his chin toward the immaculate Raptor. Look what we have here. A brand new ride for the taking. His men, 4 of them, grimy and wired, fanned out, their eyes locked on the truck. They weren't here for a fight, they were here for an escape vehicle. The hiss of the automatic door announced Seagal's return. He held a water bottle loosely in one hand, his posture relaxed but his presence filling the space. "That's my truck," he said. His voice was low, calm, like stones grinding together deep underground. "Step away from it." Kane turned, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He sized up Seagal, the ponytail, the quiet demeanor. He saw a man, not a threat. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" "The man who's telling you to walk away," Seagal replied, his gaze unwavering. One of Kane's crew, a twitchy young man with a blade scar on his cheek, stepped forward. "We need the truck, old man. Give us the keys, and we might let you keep your life." Seagal's expression didn't change. He simply said, "This is your only warning." Kane laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We're the Crimson Jackals. We don't take warnings." He nodded to his man. "Take him." The young man lunged, reaching for Seagal. It was the last move he would make by choice. The moment the thug lunged, the world seemed to slow down. Seagal didn't block, he flowed. In a single, fluid motion, he pivoted, his hand intercepting the man's outstretched wrist. It wasn't a grab, it was an absorption of energy. He applied a kotegaeshi, a classic Aikido wrist turn. A wet, sickening crack of cartilage echoed in the dry air. The thug screamed, dropping to his knees as his arm twisted at an impossible angle, his aggression instantly replaced with pure, unadulterated agony. One down. Kane's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned disbelief. Before he could even shout an order, Seagal had already moved on. Another jackal charged from the side, swinging a fist meant to shatter a jaw. Seagal spun with him, his knee driving hard into the man's floating ribs with a dull thud. As the man gasped, his body folding, Seagal's elbow completed the rotation, striking him precisely across the temple. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into a boneless heap on the gravel. 2 down. The remaining 3, now fueled by a mix of fury and dawning fear, rushed him at once. One swung a tire iron. Seagal ducked under the whistling arc of steel, his hand shooting out to grip the attacker's throat. With startling force, he used the man's own momentum to propel him backward, not into a car, but straight through the convenience store's massive plate glass window. The glass exploded in a shower of glittering shards, the crash mingling with the man's strangled cry. Inside, the old cashier dropped the walkie-talkie he'd been fumbling for, its static-filled squawk adding to the chaos. The last thug tried to tackle Seagal from behind. Without looking, Seagal shifted his weight, caught the man mid-charge, and executed a flawless Irimi nage, an entering throw. The man flew over Seagal's shoulder and slammed flat onto the hood of his own Suburban, the impact leaving a deep dent in the metal. He slid to the ground, unconscious. 4 down. In less than 20 seconds. Only Kane was left, standing frozen between the gas pump and the Raptor, the tire iron from his fallen comrade lying near his feet. He stared, his mind failing to process the surgical destruction he had just witnessed. This wasn't a fight, it was a dismantling. Seagal stood in the center of the carnage, his breathing perfectly even. He hadn't even spilled a drop of his water. He slowly unscrewed the cap, took a long sip, and screwed it back on, his eyes never leaving the terrified gang leader. He walked calmly over to the whimpering Kane. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet was more terrifying than any shout. "This isn't about strength," Seagal said, his voice a cold whisper. "It's about choices. And you just made the worst one." He then turned, walked back to his Raptor, and got in, leaving Kane standing alone amidst the wreckage of his crew and his pride. An hour later, the Crimson Jackals had limped away from the gas station, leaving behind a shattered window and the lingering scent of fear. Their new hideout was a single, squalid room in an abandoned motel on the outskirts of Phoenix. The air was thick with the smell of mold and stale cigarette smoke, and a broken neon sign outside cast flickering red pulses into the grimy space. Kane paced the room like a caged wolf, his face a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. One of his men was trying to set his own dislocated shoulder, his face pale with pain. Another lay on a filthy mattress, breathing shallowly, his ribs almost certainly cracked. The man thrown through the window was covered in bloody cuts. They were broken. "What the hell was that?" one of them groaned, clutching his side. "Who was that guy?" "I don't know," Kane snarled, slamming his fist against the peeling wallpaper. The pain in his knuckles was nothing compared to the searing shame. "But we're going to find out. Echo. Get on it. Now." A wiry young man in the corner, the crew's tech expert who went by Echo, flinched. He was already hunched over a ruggedized laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He hadn't been at the gas station, serving as their lookout from a distance. Now, he was their only hope of understanding what had just happened. "I got the plate number from the traffic cam footage I was monitoring," Echo muttered, his eyes wide. "Running it now through some back channels. It's not a standard registration. It's flagged. Private. But I can bypass it." The room was silent, save for the hum of the laptop and the pained breathing of the injured. Kane stood over Echo, his shadow looming. "Got it," Echo finally whispered, his face draining of color. He swallowed hard. "The vehicle is registered to a holding company, but the primary authorized user is Steven Seagal." The name dropped into the room like a grenade. "Wait," one of the men croaked. "Like, the movie star?" "He's more than that, you idiots," Kane growled, a horrifying realization dawning on him. He'd heard the stories, the whispers in the underworld. Echo was scrolling frantically, his eyes widening with every line he read. It's worse than that, Kane. According to these leaked intel files, he's not just an actor. The files mention affiliations with foreign security forces, training special ops units. They call him the Ghost in some circles. There's a legend about him in South America, that he dismantled a whole mercenary squad single-handedly. They say he's a master of a dozen martial arts. A chilling silence fell over the room. They hadn't just tried to rob a tough guy. They had attacked a living legend, a man whose skills were the stuff of nightmares for people like them. So what now? The man with the broken wrist asked, his voice trembling. We lay low. We disappear. Kane's eyes burned with a new kind of fire. It wasn't just shame anymore. It was primal fear. A man like Seagal wouldn't just let them go. He was a loose end, and people like him tied up loose ends. More importantly, a story like this would get out. The Crimson Jackals, the fearsome fugitives, taken down by one man. Their reputation, the only currency they had left, would be destroyed. Police and rivals would see them as weak, as prey. No, Kane said, his voice deadly calm. We don't run. A man like that on our tail, the cops will be the least of our problems. We have to finish this. We find him. We set a trap. And this time, it's not a fight. It's an execution. He looked at his broken crew. We either erase him, or he erases us. Steven Seagal knew they would come. Men like Kane, driven by ego and desperation, didn't learn from a lesson, they only understood annihilation. He didn't drive far. He drove to a place he knew, a place of profound silence and solitude, an abandoned solar farm deep in the desert. It was a hauntingly beautiful graveyard of technology, with endless rows of massive solar panels tilted toward a sky of infinite blue. They stood like silent, glass-eyed soldiers, their surfaces reflecting the stark, empty landscape. It was vast, open, and far from any innocent bystanders. He parked the Raptor in the shadow of a large transformer station and got out. The only sound was the whisper of the wind whistling through the steel support struts. He didn't pull a weapon. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a string of dark, wooden prayer beads. He sat on a concrete block, his back to a steel pillar, and began polishing each bead with a small cloth, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't waiting for a fight, he was in a state of active meditation, his mind as calm and clear as the desert air. He had chosen this place because it was empty. There would be no collateral damage here. An hour later, a low rumble vibrated through the ground, growing steadily louder. The Crimson Jackals were coming. From a ridge overlooking the solar farm, Kane watched through binoculars. He saw the black Raptor parked, a lone sentinel in the metallic forest. There he is, he hissed to his men, who were now armed with more than just fists. They had pipes, chains, and a crowbar. He's alone. Perfect. Their approach this time was tactical, or so they thought. The two cars entered the farm from different access roads, spreading out to flank the area where the Raptor was parked. They intended to use their vehicles to box him in, their high beams to blind him. It was a predator's strategy, designed to overwhelm a cornered target. They stopped in a wide semicircle, car doors opening with a sinister harmony of clicks. 5 men, including Echo, who was forced to come along, stepped out, their makeshift weapons glinting in the late afternoon sun. They advanced slowly, a closing net of vengeful figures. We found you, legend. Kane shouted, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast, quiet space. He held a heavy crowbar, gripping it like a scepter. You should have kept driving. Today, this desert is your grave. The only response was the sigh of the wind. The space where Seagal should have been was empty. The men exchanged nervous glances. Then, from the deep shadows behind a row of panels, a figure emerged. Steven Seagal stepped into the light, his prayer beads now wrapped securely around his left wrist. He was calm, his face unreadable. He took 2 steps forward, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Cain grinned, a grotesque slash of confidence. "Oh, we're sure." He raised the crowbar. "No more talking. Get him." All 5 men charged at once. The charge was a wave of chaotic violence meant to crush him. For Seagal, it was a symphony of openings. The man with the chain swung it in a wide, whistling arc. Seagal didn't back away, he moved into it. He ducked under the chain, his hand catching the man's wrist mid-swing. Using the man's own wild momentum, he spun him around and launched him headfirst into the thick steel support strut of a solar panel. The impact was a sickening clang of metal and bone, and the man crumpled to the ground, out cold. Another jackal tried a running tackle from the side. Seagal used the reflective surface of a nearby panel to see the attack coming without turning his head. He sidestepped with perfect timing, his leg shooting out to trip the charging man, who tumbled past him and crashed into a junction box with a shower of sparks. Echo, the tech, hesitantly swung a pipe. It was a clumsy, fear-driven attack. Seagal caught the pipe, twisted it effortlessly from the young man's grasp, and tapped him sharply behind the knee. Echo yelped and fell, his fight over before it began. Now it was Cain and his last man, who advanced from opposite sides. Seagal stood his ground, the captured pipe held loosely in one hand. Cain went straight in, crowbar raised for a skull-shattering overhead blow. Seagal moved with blinding speed. He parried the crowbar with the pipe, the clang of steel on steel ringing through the farm. In the same motion, he twisted his body, disarming Cain and sending the crowbar flying. Before Cain could react, Seagal delivered a spinning heel kick, not to his head, but with surgical precision to the side of Cain's knee. There was a loud pop, and Cain roared in agony as his leg buckled beneath him. The last man watched in horror, his attack faltering. That split second of hesitation was all Seagal needed. He closed the distance and delivered a series of rapid, devastating strikes, an open palm to the chest to disrupt his breathing, a precise jab to the nerve cluster in his neck. The man's eyes went wide with shock before he collapsed, his body twitching. The entire battle had lasted less than 60 seconds. Silence returned to the solar farm, broken only by the groans of the defeated and the whistling of the wind. The Crimson Jackals were scattered amongst the panels like broken toys, their weapons lying useless in the dust. Seagal stood over the kneeling, whimpering Cain, his breathing still steady, his expression unchanged. He looked down not with anger, but with a kind of profound disappointment. He tossed the pipe aside. "Violence is your language," Seagal said, his voice calm and clear. "Discipline is my answer." He looked around at the wreckage of the gang, then back at their leader. "Class is over." He turned and walked back toward his raptor, his duty done. The desert had borne witness to a lesson written in pain and humiliation, a lesson the survivors would never forget. The desert wind was cold as it kicked up dust around the shattered pride of the Crimson Jackals. Cain struggled to his knees, his legs screaming in protest, the bent crowbar lying beside him. "Get up," he growled, his voice hoarse. "All of you, get up." No one moved. In that moment of utter silence and defeat, Cain finally understood. It was over. Not just the fight, but the gang, the fear they projected, the illusion of power they wore like a second skin. Steven Seagal had stripped it all away. Later that night, the main hospital in Flagstaff was a sterile, quiet world away from the desert. Cain sat alone in the emergency room waiting area, his leg in a temporary cast. Echo was being treated for a concussion, and another member had a fractured jaw. A nurse approached with a clipboard, her expression a mixture of professionalism and suspicion. "You all listed the cause of injury as a construction site accident," she said, looking up from her notes. "Is that accurate? These don't look like construction injuries." Cain gave a dry, bitter laugh. "Lady," he rasped, "it was more accurate than you'll ever know." She left him in the silence. He sat there for nearly an hour until the automatic doors slid open. He looked up, his body tensing instantly. Steven Seagal walked in. He wasn't aggressive or triumphant. He was just a calm, immovable presence. He walked over and stood before Kane. "You here to finish it?" Kane asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I came to make sure you understand it's over," Seagal said, his eyes as cold and clear as ice. A broken, desperate look crossed Kane's face. "What the hell are you?" "I'm a reminder," Seagal said, his voice low and deadly serious. "A reminder to men like you that some lines should never be crossed. You came looking for violence. I gave you discipline." He leaned in slightly. "You ever threaten an innocent person again, and I won't stop at breaking bones." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Without looking back, he said one last thing. "You have two choices. Change, or disappear." Then he was gone. By morning, the story was everywhere. Surveillance footage from the gas station had leaked. A grainy, long-distance clip from a weather station camera near the solar farm had been uploaded. The internet exploded. Legendary martial artist Steven Seagal dismantles fugitive gang. Crimson Jackals gang captured after encounter with action star. The comments were a flood of awe. "That's not a fight, that's a physics lesson," one wrote. "He never even threw the first punch." "Total masterclass," said another. Days later, Seagal revisited the gas station. The old cashier nearly dropped his coffee. You came back." Seagal offered a faint smile. "Just needed some water." "Sir," the man stammered, "reporters were here. Some security company donated a whole new camera system. You're a hero." Seagal simply handed him a $10 bill for the water. As he walked back to his truck, he saw a new, handwritten sticker on the glass door where the window had been replaced. It read, "Protected by a guardian." He got behind the wheel, took a long sip from the cold bottle, and a rare, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He turned the key, and the Raptor's engine rumbled to life. He drove off, disappearing into the sunrise, a quiet warrior leaving nothing behind but a lesson, and a little piece of justice in the desert. Justice can come in unexpected forms. What did you think of Seagal's brand of discipline? Let us know in the comments below. Please be sure to comment with respect for everyone's opinion and the individuals involved. If you enjoyed this story of justice in the desert, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true stories.